Formula One is one of the most popular sporting events in the world, although some people may argue it's not even a sporting event. Maybe that is why Formula One is no longer hosted in the picture behind me. Formula One is one of the most watched sporting events in the world, and some rankings say that it is only number 3 following football and cricket. India accounts for millions of Formula One fans. Some people say it's the fifth highest, only after China, Brazil, Mexico, and the United States of America. But Formula One wasn't always wildly popular in India. Before the 2000s, Formula One was largely watched by a niche audience. Yours truly was one of the members of that niche audience. Formula One grew in popularity with the dominance of Michael Schumacher in his Scarlet Ferrari. And it really peaked in popularity, I believe, when Formula One races were held in Budh International Circuit in Noida. There was a dip in Formula One popularity when the races stopped being held in Budh International Circuit. Interestingly, all three races were won by German driver Sebastian Vettel. But there was a resurgence in popularity of Formula One in the post Geo affordable internet era, and also with the acquisition of Formula One by the Liberty Group and the launching of the Netflix series Drive to Survive. Also, with many YouTube content creators talking only about Formula One's dedicated fan base has found a presence not just worldwide but also in India. One of the most popular YouTube channels is Kunal's F1 blog. So I wanted to talk about one thing about Formula One that not many people talk about. It is the popularity of Formula One in small town India. And I don't think there is anyone more qualified to talk about this issue than my friend Raunaq Sahu, who I believe has the maximum knowledge about Formula One than anyone else living. If you find someone who knows more than him, do let me know in the comment section. So without further ado, let's welcome Raunaq Sahu to talk about Formula One, something that I have always been urging him to create a YouTube channel and talk exclusively about, because he knows more about Formula One, I repeat, than anyone else anywhere in the world. Raunaq Sahu currently works for a multinational company in an undisclosed part of India which rhymes with Bengaluru, and today he has agreed to join me to talk about Formula One.
Thanks for having me.
The last time you were here, we were talking about Rafael Nadal. He had just announced his retirement, and we are making this video just after the French Open 2025. Amazing final. But today we are going to talk only about Formula One. Formula One, if for those who don't know, is one of the most popular sports in the world, although some people in India don't even regard it as a sporting event. Probably why Formula One is no longer featured in the picture behind me.
People and governments.
Yeah. In a cricket crazy country like India, especially in the 1990s when cable television was in its nascent stage, I believe ESPN came into India in 1995. I'm really curious because even ChatGPT says that before 2000, India had a very niche audience for Formula One. And you and I, we were part of the people following Formula One before 2000. I'm very curious, how were you drawn to Formula One at that stage when cable TV was not so prominent, when social media didn't exist, when there was no YouTube? What drew you to Formula One, and how were you able to sustain your interest in Formula One back in the late 90s?
It obviously begins with cable TV coming into our homes. I distinctly remember, I think it was 1996, end of 1996, where we wouldn't even call it cable then. We used to just call it ZTV. We have ZTV now, which basically meant it was a proxy for all the other channels and entertainment beyond your DD1, DD Metro, DD regional channels, right? That was obviously, I mean, we'll get to Formula One in a bit, but I think that was, at least for a lot of us who were growing up in the 90s, that was the moment where we got exposed, knowingly or unknowingly, to a lot of different cultures or To be fair to say, I mean, it's also a lot of it was homogenized, maybe American, in some cases British culture, but nonetheless, it was above and beyond what was typically on Indian television at the time. So there was always that fascination. And so that was basically that was the genesis, I would say, of trying to find out, what you like. And those are your formative years, right? You're kind of figuring out your place in the world, and your I think from the ages of 7 to the age of 15 or even 20 in some cases, like that's where you become who you really are, right? So there was that. Cable TV was definitely a factor. The second thing was, I don't seem to remember a time where I was not fascinated by all things automotive. I think I I still have, I remember, I think I still have those, to be honest. I have my cutouts of, when the Hero Honda CBZ was launched, and the Daewoo Cielo, the Daewoo Nexia, which was, in my opinion, back then the most beautiful car sold in India. So I always had this fascination towards cars and bikes. And of course, a little bit of it was also due to, back in the day, my one of my maternal uncles had a career which got him to travel a lot. And some of those stories that you would hear from him about cars, about how things are done overseas, I think it was a combination of all of those things, right? And the all of these things came together in a moment in time, which I would probably date to, it's 1997 or late 97 or early 98. I don't remember very well, but I remember watching this. So there was this company called Trans World International or Trans World Sports, or there
Yes.
was some program called The Wide World of Sports or
Yes.
something
Yes.
like that, which was like a weekly roundup of global
Yes.
sporting events. So I distinctly remember watching an episode on a Monday or a Tuesday where, you had, the week gone by. There was this segment called the events of the past week or headlines or whatever, where you had, they would list all these major sporting events around the world, and Formula One was one of them, right? Um, so as an aside, I think that was the time when did Bazigar come out? 1995, 94,
Yeah.
and
94,
we would
90.
have probably watched it at that time.
Yes.
So all of those things, right? So the whole idea of, how glamorous this thing is, and obviously in for a kid growing up in small town India, that world was really really far away, right? So that obviously adds to the mystique of it. You
Yes.
always yearn for something you cannot have. There was all of that. And so the awareness of the sport that came about in like this worldwide wide world of sports, whatever that program's name was, I'm forgetting. That was the moment when I sort of became aware of it. And there was also, auto magazines. So there was that as well, right? I used to beg my father and my relatives to buy me the latest copy of Autocar magazine or Business Standard Motoring or Auto India. Auto India because it was cheaper. It was 30 rupees an issue. Autocar was 40 rupees an issue. And back in the day, getting a magazine for 40 rupees was, I mean, in our parents' eyes at least, a scandal. So in Autocar magazine, you had at least 15 to 20 pages. So there was, because I think it was part of the Haymarket Group in the UK, they also published a magazine called F1 Racing. Autocar used to have this segment, this motorsport segment, where they would print around 15, 20 pages directly from the previous issue of F1 Racing magazine. So you would get race reports by Peter Windsor, analysis by Michael Scott. And so these names sort of started taking up their space in my mind, so to speak. I think that was the whole genesis of it, how it began.
Full context. Ronak and I, we are from the 33rd largest urban agglomeration in India. We are nowhere part of the most developed part of India. India is not part of the most developed part of the world. We were not part of the most developed part of India. We were not even part of the most developed part of the state we were living in. And
Yeah.
still, we were curious about all these things. And Ronak has very eloquently put it how he was able to sustain his interest mostly through magazines because that's
And
this was
yeah, on sorry, just the other thing, I wanted to also mention the fact that I lived. My father used to work in SAIL, Steel Authority of India, the Burnpur hospital. So we had a club there called the Burnpur Club, which had a library. It was not much of a library. It was basically like, I mean, books which I'm presuming British families had just left behind when they left, and maybe in the 50s and 60s, whatever vestiges of, maybe senior officers or their families, they basically bequeathed those books to this library. Not very well maintained, really old, musty wooden cupboards. But there was a book there I found, which was partly eaten by probably rodents, which was about the history of Formula One. Um, History in the sense, I think it covered the period from 1965 to 75 or something like that. And I, I borrowed it, and so me and my friend Guru Prasad Das, we borrowed it, and we never returned it. We didn't return it for an entire year. And I think after I made copies of it and everything, your friendly neighborhood Xerox shop could make copies of it. I still have it. So so it was a lot of work to be really uh, to be really succinct. It was a lot of work being a quote unquote fan back then, because things that we take for granted now were, I mean, not even on we hadn't even conceptualized the idea of having a handheld device which could do all of the things it does today, right? So, so yeah. So that was the point on, sustaining interest, because it was not easy, let me tell you that.
So, as per some reports that I have come across online, India has, by some estimates, 31 million Formula One fans. That's the fifth largest in the world, only after countries like China, Mexico, Brazil, and the United States of America. Brazil, by the way, has the most dedicated fan base in the world in terms of people who watch a race live. India doesn't even feature in the top 20 when it comes to live race viewership. As someone who has watched races live for so many years now, what would you think is the reason that India has so many fans, but it doesn't feature in the list of top 10 or even top 20 countries with live viewership of races on TV?
I find that a bit odd, to be very honest, especially in today's day and age when you have access to races. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? And most of the people who we think of as Formula One fans in India um, are not restricted because of their lack of means, if I may say so. Because I mean, in here in Bangalore, in Bombay, in Delhi, you have all of these, watch parties in bars and pubs, and they are full. People, shouting expletives at each other, and really getting worked up over, you know, Max's dastardly moves or whatever. So I find that a bit surprising that people are fans, but they do not watch races live. I don't know how that computes, to be honest. Maybe it's the methodology of, defining who a fan is. I don't know. We have to get into that. I honestly don't have an answer for it. It kind of doesn't make sense to me, to be honest.
Yes, there is also this hypothesis. Although I don't know if it is after this or it was before this, but as we speak, India does not have an official TV broadcaster for Formula One.
No. Yes, correct. Which I mean, I trust. I don't like the bean counters and the MBA types who make these decisions, but I am 100% sure they have arrived had this decision based on, cold, hard, sobering facts. So maybe maybe to them it makes perfect sense. There is no reason to have it in have a Formula One broadcast on one of their channels, which is available on your DTH platforms. Probably there is not a market for that at all. In that sense, it's a niche audience. I mean, obviously, it's a niche audience. No matter what we say, the cricket is king. I mean, it's just the way it is. I remember, I mean, even back in the 15 years back, we used to joke about this, and that joke is true even today. You have how many channels does Star Sports have on DTH platforms? Probably eight or nine now. And so the joke is that it's not Star Sports anymore. It's Star Cricket, Star Cricket, Star Cricket, Star Cricket Hindi, Star Cricket Tamil, etc., etc. Right? So nothing against the sport per se, but if broadcasters are making this decision, I'm sure there is a reason for that. Maybe advertisers in India are just not willing to pay. Maybe the target audience, the catchment area, so to speak, is just not, they don't have that critical mass here. And considering that they had the broadcast with them for so long, in fact, back in the day when we started watching it, it was not a Star Sports broadcast. It was a syndicated Fox Sports Asia broadcast, and you had Steve Slater and Chris Goodwin and Steve Dawson and Paula Malayali were the hosts of the show. And 4:25 you would have race day. Then 5:25 the race would start, and then after the race you had checkered flag, the post race analysis show. All of it was obviously those, I think the episodes or the studio was in Singapore and it was broadcast to the entire Asian audience. Um, they expanded it later on. I think it sort of reached an inflection point with the 2010 to 12, the Indian Grand Prix. And then, I mean, for reasons I'm also not entirely sure about, I mean, it does seem like they no longer think there is a viable market for this broadcast, which is at odds with the other observation I made, that there are at least, on social media, it seems like there are enough fans, which again goes to show that social media is a very inadequate representation of reality. I guess we can leave it at that.
Yes, we will. So, now that you've talked about the ebbs and flows of public attention towards Formula One in India, I would like to get more personal. So, when you were at home, you had more control over the stuff you wanted to watch. Ideally speaking, if your parents were allowing, you were able to watch a sport on television. But when you go out of your home, go into a hostel space where you are part of a larger crowd, most of whom would be more crazy about cricket and football than about Formula One, how were you able to sustain your interest in Formula One and continue watching races live when you were in a hostel environment?
There was this Vardhan from God that we got when I went to college, when I went to IIT in 2008. And that Vardhan was LAN, high-speed internet, because the top national institutes in India were a part of this. I think there was this, what was it called? There was the National Fiber Optic Network. I'm forgetting. There was a term for that. So National Knowledge Network, NKN, yes, which connected all these, top institutes, all India institutes. So that was one. So you had that. Internet was a game changer. The uh, going from our dial-up or GPRS internet at home to really truly high-speed LAN was a big game changer. I think there was that, and there was also, obviously, I had a group of friends who were also people who grew up in who were basically expat Indians, and they had this because their elder brothers or their siblings were into Formula One or other sports, and they sort of got that interest. So it was not difficult to find a tribe of people because you had people from all over India there. Then, of course, there was the hostel common room. So in my hostel, we were around 15, 20 of us who used to watch the races. And so every Sunday, we used to Saturday and Sunday, both the qualifying and the races, we used to end up in the hostel common room, which had this really massive. So this was before your cheap Chinese LED days. So this was a massive Philips projection TV, paid for by the Indian taxpayer, I'm sure. But we had that fantastic TV with fantastic sound in a massive room. Problem with the room was you had monkeys coming in, shitting and leaving, but that's a different, because when you think I think of that room, my first memory is the smell, and because it was carpeted and it did not have air conditioning, that was not a good combination. But coming back, so we used to this was this group of people who used to watch the races, and there was one, I'll not take his name. He works for a very successful, a very large IT firm in the US today. So he was a Fernando Alonso fan, and we had disagreements, needless to say, and also some really hilarious moments, which was Vitaly Petrov not letting Alonso through and me just laughing at him throughout. Um, there were instances, especially during IPL season, because it was Chennai, and you had even back then, right? By 2010-11, you already had this rabid mass of IPL fans, and because you had, the composition of the student population was predominantly Telugu and Tamil, with the rest of India being, comprising around 20%, 25%, let's say. So you were obviously always hopelessly outnumbered when it came to, watching what you wanted on a Sunday. Same goes with, it happened with Grand Slam finals, it happened with Premier League matches, Champions League. Even though I would say you still had more football fans, you had a better chance of catching a football game than you had of watching a tennis match or a Formula One race. So I distinctly remember this India-Australia match where, it was a 50 over match. Nothing much was happening. It was like, I think 25, the 25th to 40th over period of the match where, the race was going on. And I was so pissed off that they did not even want to change the channel for 5 minutes during the commercial breaks, right? So I got so pissed off that I started cheering for Australia, and I escaped narrowly with my life on that day. So yeah, I was a fan back in the day, believe it or not, to the point of endangering my own safety. So yeah, sustaining was not a problem. I think because of these reasons, and because now you had internet, you could also, it never ended, right? Earlier, when we were at home, it was always about reading the newspaper the next day, right? And the Telegraph would have a syndicated report from AFP or Reuters. Some other newspaper, if I happened to get the Times of India or the Asian Age, they would have it from some other news agency. So that would be a different soundbite. It would be a different interview, snippets anyway, because not much space was given to motor racing back in the day. But with internet and with access to all of this, you could always, you had a Top Gear magazine back then, had a Formula One blog. I used to read Ed Straw and Peter Windsor, who still makes fantastic videos. I would still say, the most analytical and data driven videos are made by him. And I grew up reading his race reports in F1 racing. So, so that was another dimension. I think that I'll attribute it to the internet and to, a group of like-minded people.
So I believe you already answered this question, but just to put a button on this, did you ever stop caring about Formula One throughout your life?
I kind of have now. Um, is it not caring? I don't know. I don't follow it as much. These days, I don't, like, for instance, yesterday, uh, 10 years or 15 years ago, I would have stayed up and watched qualifying yesterday. I don't do that anymore. I have no interest in doing that. Um, I watched the highlights. It was a 7 minute YouTube clip posted by Formula One by Liberty Media themselves, and I watched the last 2 minutes of it. So I think once you don't have that personal involvement, and I think it goes for most sports. If you do not have somebody you are properly supporting or you are a fan of, you tend to not have that emotional attachment, and your brain stops sending those signals ki, no, I have to watch this, I have to do this. And then the mood for the entire week is dictated by how well or how poorly your favorite driver or team performed on Sunday. So that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. I think I stopped caring. Yeah, I'm okay. Let's use the right words here. I am no longer a fan. I have an academic interest now, so I keep myself abreast of what's going on, but not to the extent of how I used to do it back in the day.
Since when have you stopped being a fan?
I think it's been almost 10 years now, I would say. You know, better
Okay.
part of 10 years, I think. Yeah.
All right. So this is a quote I had come across talking about tennis, that you can have really good tennis players, excellent tennis players, but they may not be stars. The two things are not synonymous. Star is somebody who has an aura which transcends the sport. That even if you haven't watched tennis, you're aware of this guy who is, you probably not watched a tennis match, but you know about him. Maybe to an extent that is happening in Formula One as well. So carrying on with your point, I my next question was about the current dominant player or driver in Formula One, Max Verstappen. I would like to know from if Max Verstappen were to retire today, as we are recording this video, where would you rank him in the list of greats in the history of Formula One?
Should we go with who I think are the belong to the Mount Rushmore of Formula One, and then we can talk about where Max Verstappen sits?
Yeah, you can approach it the way you want, as long as you get to Max
Okay,
Verstappen.
I will. Um, so for me, it's very simple. Um, Based on what I know, what I have read, what I have heard over all these years, I genuinely think you've got four drivers who, in my view, can be considered as the greatest, and you can make a case for any of these drivers. I would say number one and number two would be between uh, Juan Manuel Fangio and Jim Clark. Uh, and the next step would be between Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, with Lewis Hamilton being slightly behind them, I would say. Um, in this scheme of things, I would say Max Verstappen, based on his achievements today, I would rank him closely behind Lewis Hamilton. I think I would definitely say on that pecking order, he would be somewhere. Um, what would that be? Fifth, sixth? Depending on your personal preference, obviously. I would say the first five positions you can pick and choose however you want, depending on your preference and who you like or dislike. But I genuinely think we should make a distinction between, the first 30, 40 years of Formula One, where it was definitely a professional sport, but not to the extent that we started to see in the 90s, in the late 80s and beyond, where a lot of things beyond the world of racing itself became very important, like, your sponsorships, deals, how many eyeballs you're attracting and all of that. So that commercial imperative became a lot more important, as the world moved towards, post Soviet Union disintegration world order. I know I'm like stretching this a bit, but I genuinely think we need to make a distinction between, those drivers and modern era drivers. So back then, for the first era, you would say Fangio or Clark, pick your greatest. And for the modern era, the modern
And
driver,
when
I
does
would
the modern
say
era start? When would you say the modern?
80s, mid 80s, I would say. Mid 80s.
Okay, 85,
For
say.
the modern era, I would say, yeah, I would say uh, in my view, Michael Schumacher was the embodiment of what a modern Formula One driver should be. And in many ways, what you see today from the fitness and the commitment and all of that, I think a lot of it was started by Senna, improved by Schumacher, and taken to a place where you never saw before that. And now I think the current era basically maintains that. So yes, coming back to your question, very long answer, but Max Verstappen is definitely there. Um, I don't know if we are going to talk about his controversial behavior on track, but I don't care about that. When I think about the fastest and the best drivers, for me, it's very simple. You put all these guys in the same car, who do you think will win? For me, that's who do you think will be the fastest over a race distance? Um, that's also a catch, right? Just being a good qualifier in my book is not enough to be called the best the best racing driver, because there is a difference between a time trial and actual racing. A time trial is when you have, the ideal tire compound, the lowest level of fuel, the engine settings and brake balance and all of that tuned for performance, where your car is equipped to go as fast as it possibly can for a lap or two. A race, in my view, is a true test for, any racing discipline, because it's generally it's 90 minutes long. You have to deal with varying conditions. You have to deal with varying um, tire degradation levels. You have to deal with varying fuels. You also have to have the spare mental capacity to make adjustments as you go along. You have to think about strategy. So when you bring all of these things together, you have the ideal racing driver. So if I were to judge Max by all these parameters, I struggle to see a weakness. I don't really think he has any real weaknesses. And in many ways, I feel like um, he is kind of the son that Michael Schumacher didn't have. So I know it's a bit of a stretch to say that, but in terms of his, the commitment, the speed in races. I mean, in general, he's very fast, but his ability to manage races, to attack when required, to manage tires when required. In many ways, I feel like he's the most, at the moment at least, the most complete driver. Um, Obviously, I'll caveat it by saying that I'm not comparing the Lewis Hamilton of today to him, because Lewis is, let's be fair, he's on the wrong side of 40. And this is in my view, he's in a very nice sort of retirement job, which which is good for him and good for this company, because they'll make a lot of money. But yeah, that's my honest assessment of Max Verstappen. Um, his on-track behavior is obviously not ideal, but I mean, come on, I don't really concern myself with that when I'm deciding who the better driver is. Better person, maybe not, but better driver, definitely.
So, just to follow up with this, if he achieves more, do you think there is a possibility that when he eventually retires, Max Verstappen, do you think you might consider him to be the greatest Formula One driver of the modern era?
Why not? I mean, let's say he goes to Williams, or he comes to Ferrari and wins a title with them, then why not? But if he wins another six, seven titles with Red Bull, hmm, probably not. So it's not always. I know we say in some sports it is definitely the numbers, but this is a sport where it's not just the numbers. Numbers always have context in Formula One, especially when it's a sport where the rest of the team, the the engineering, the strategy, and all of that makes so much of a difference. And especially as the years go on, the driver accounts for less and less of that, difference. I would say, you know, um, that's the reason why I feel two-wheeled racing has more of a the rider makes more of a difference than a Formula One driver is able to, because and it's just because of the technology, right? I mean, you let's face it, you could have Fangio and Senna in the same team. You could put them in a Williams, but they will not place higher than sixth or seventh, probably. So there definitely is the equipment factor. So if he were to go to some other team and continue increasing his tally, then yes, why not? I mean, in terms of raw speed, he has clearly shown since the day he stepped into an F1 car and took part in a race, back when he was 17. I think the victory in the Spanish Grand Prix in a Toro Rosso is one of the greatest feats I've ever seen in motor racing. It and believe me, it takes a lot for me to be um, shocked or surprised or impressed, because just because of the fact that we've been watching for so long, right? So definitely very impressive driver, and there's absolutely no reason why he cannot be considered as one of the greats if he drives long enough.
So I want to ask a controversial question here. Again, growing up, we were surrounded in our families, in a friends group, by people who like cricket mostly. What made you prefer Formula One to cricket?
Look, to be honest, I was never a cricket fan. I Because that was the only, pretty much the only sport anybody really watched, right? And the Football World Cup. I mean, we started. I don't know about you, but because I don't consider myself to be a, hardcore football fan, but I started watching, let's say, Premier League games a lot later, like maybe in 2000 or 2001. Before that, it was always okay. It was cricket, and it was the Football World Cup. That's all. Um, it was never a cricket never really held that much of a fascination for me, and that was definitely one. So it didn't take much for me to sort of, you know, latch on to Formula One and stay latched on for, the better part of my formative years. And then there are certain moments, right, in all of our lives. Whoever is watching, I'm sure you have also experienced this. There are some things you remember really vividly in your life, right? For me, one of those things is the just watching the 1998 Italian Grand Prix. Now, as I said, I was aware of Formula One from probably 1997. I was watching these, week in review sports programs, and I was following the sport a little bit, obviously trying to read what I could in the newspaper and all of that. But 1998 is the season I think I properly followed, and I remember quite a few races from that season. And that's how I'm evaluating which year was my first proper year, let's say. Now, the image I'm talking about is, I think, the 1998 Italian Grand Prix. Uh, Michael Schumacher won that race. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm struggling to remember, but it was the first win for Ferrari on home soil at Monza since 1987 or 1988, whatever it was. Well, after a 10-year period, it was the first time they won in Italy. and it was a fantastic race. I think he started third or fourth, and he sort of there was a proper battle between him and Hakkinen. So till that point, I hadn't developed any loyalties. Okay, because it was quite an exciting season. You had a McLaren which was clearly faster, but you also had the best driver of the generation in another car who was giving it his all and fighting Mika Hakkinen. So races were close. You had, these two were essentially, finishing first and second pretty much throughout the season, finishing on the podium. And the Italian Grand Prix, Ferrari were trailing, and it was a very important race for multiple reasons, which obviously I realized much later what the importance of that race was, even though eventually Mika Häkkinen did win the title. But just that image, right, of the podium celebrations with the fans, the Tifosi invading the track with that, the customary massive Ferrari flag that they hold right below the podium. That was a very powerful image, right, for an 8-year-old to see. And that was the turning point. That is where, the loyalty developed, and it stayed. It stayed and it still does. So I think that was the reason. I mean, to your question on cricket, cricket never really, for some reason, I can't explain it, but it never really held much of a fascination for me. And once this happened, I was like, okay, once you find your team and your driver to root for, I think that's it. You are you are set for life.
Yes, so you pointed out that you were 8 years old. We were the same age. I remember my earliest memory of Formula One was a commercial, which really stayed with me. So again, we were in a Irish school. We were exposed to English at a very young age, and you had to learn English. If we couldn't communicate in English from a very young age, we were punished severely. So my way of learning English was not just in school, but also while watching any English commercials. I would be very curious about what they are trying to say. So what I remember is there was this commercial for Formula One. I believe it was uh, beginning of '99 season. Uh, the battle between reigning world champion Mika Hakkinen and two-time world champion Michael Schumacher. The word that drew my interest was reigning world champion. And again, this is a 7-year-old, 8-year-old thinking, reigning world champion. Why is the world champion? Why is there rain around the world champion? I used to think RAIN, rain. So that was what drew me to it. This word which I learned by watching the commercial. Then I wanted to know who is Mika Häkkinen, who is Michael Schumacher, and we used to see only
Yeah.
the uh, eyes. And my impression was because
Yeah.
of the veins around the eyes, I would think these are really old people. And then you saw them without the helmet and you realize they're not old. So yeah, this is the power of images and certain thoughts that you remember. I wanted to ask one more question. Now that you've talked about that numbers not being the most important thing, I have a question designed just for that. Who would you say is the greatest Formula One driver to have never won a Formula One World Championship?
I mean, by all accounts, it's Sterling Moss. I think, um, even though you obviously have to, I mean, as non-British people, our first instinct is to sort of look properly, look deeply to see whether or not they are talking sense. But in Sterling Moss's case, I believe, yes, fantastic driver, highly rated by his peers, and he won races all over the place, right? I'm not just talking about Formula One. He was a very prolific driver. He's, your transcontinental races, endurance racing, and back then they used to race everything, right? It was not as regimented and segmented as it is today. And to be realistic, it's not possible today as well with the demands that modern Formula One or modern racing in general places on an individual. Um, I mean, now that I brought this up, I would be remiss to not mention that, the late great Jim Clark was not killed in a Formula One accident. He was actually killed when he was testing a Formula Two car. So back in the day, the evaluation of a driver's ability was not just about the number of wins or pole positions like it is today, because now you do not have, at least unless they are nearing their retirement or they don't really have a chance of winning in Formula One, you don't see them taking part in other races. The Le Mans 24 Hours, which is going on as we speak. Ferrari was leading last I remember. So last I checked. But yeah, I think it has to be Sterling Moss. Going by all his other accomplishments and how highly he was rated and respected by his peers. Um, I can't think of any other um, truly great drivers who I felt never won a world championship. Though I will mention Stefan Beloff. Stefan Beloff died at a very young age, and by all accounts, he was seen as the next big thing. In terms of raw speed, people spoke of him in the same vein as the greats of the 50s and 60s. So I would think of these two names. It would be Sterling Moss and Stefan Beloff.
Now, I think I'll ask you what I believe is the most difficult question that I could think of that I can ask you. Who would you say is the greatest Formula One driver to have never won a single race in Formula One?
That's an interesting one. My recency bias says it's Nico Hülkenberg, but who would it be? Heinz Harald? No, Heinz Harald Frentzen won a race. Hmm, that's an interesting one. I can't think of uh, anyone else apart from Nico Hülkenberg at the moment.
Yeah, there was this Drive to
Yeah,
Survive scene, I believe, where somebody asks him, "How many races have you won?" Some child, and he's
some child. Yeah,
and he's like, he's not impressed. He's not impressed
yeah,
that the child is
yeah.
not impressed. But then this is
You have to do so much winning. You have to win all your life to get to Formula One, and
yes.
then
And Formula One is one of
yeah,
those sports which I had mentioned in the intro that you can't play with your friends. If you like it, you can't just play with
yeah,
unless you have a
yeah.
very good video game setup, which is possible these days. But when we started watching, you just watched it. There were 20 people playing it. Any-
Oh, that reminds me, Bonpur Club. How did I forget this? So there was this MS-DOS game. I believe it was called 1997, 1998. I can check it out. So we had that game on a floppy disk in Bonpur Club where you used to take turns to play. And you had, because it's some sort of demo or whatever it was, you could only select three teams: Ferrari, McLaren, and Williams. And no prizes for guessing which team I would select. But the McLaren was much faster, and I could never really go beyond second place. So that reminds me, yeah. I mean, so back then you had these really rare moments where you could, actually play a game. Today, I think even back in my college days, I remember in final year when um, we were to submit our MA thesis. Basically, you didn't have classes; you just had, your obligation was to show up every week in the department, talk to your thesis guide, figure out the approach and go and do your own thing. So that was that semester, my 10th semester. I remember me and Abhay, my friend, he had this really, high spec computer on which we installed F1 2012. And we bought a controller as well, and we used to take turns playing it. We used to play F1 2012 and Dirt, which was the successor to Colin McRae Dirt. So these kinds of avenues of engagement were not really easily available to us. I envy kids these days.
Okay. So now let's get a bit controversial. Let's ask the question that many people have vehemently asked, been exasperated about. What is your opinion regarding the question that everybody seems to want an answer to? Why are there no female Formula One drivers?
There were, you had Lella Lombardi, who I believe she scored a point as well, and she was. She was, by all accounts, a very accomplished driver. In rallying, you had Michel Mouton, who is, in my view, one of the most legendary World Rally Championship drivers. You know, she fought toe to toe with the Walter Rolls of the day and the Stig Blomqvists of the day. So I don't believe uh, a woman cannot make it in Formula One, to be honest. I don't see any reason why that cannot happen. There are some good drivers at the moment. Some of them I can think about are, Sophia Flores, uh, Livy Brewer, Marta Garcia Lopez. There are a few. So there is a lot of representation in the lower classes right now. There was also a female, because we are talking motorsports, Anna Carrasco, she was riding in the Moto3 World Championship with all her opponents were men. So it's not that it cannot be done. In fact, it has been done. Um, I really don't understand why it hasn't happened in the last 30 years or so, at least in Formula One, because there is absolutely, and now I'm leaving the racing aside, I'm talking about the business aspect of it. There is massive scope in terms of how many more eyeballs you can attract. I can already imagine the headlines. Some things you don't talk about. Let's say in tennis, you can't talk about Djokovic taking on Sabalenka, but you can definitely talk about, let's say Verstappen taking on a female driver. That would be, absolutely perfect for tabloids and for Drive to Survive and for general interest in the sport. And I think it would be a great thing. Susie Wolf, wife of Toto Wolf, was a test driver for Williams for a while. She was the only female test driver at that time, and I believe she's involved in an academy, or she has an academy which is working towards bringing a female driver into Formula One. Um, I don't think the physical disadvantage is as bad, as skewed, let's say, as in some other sports. So I feel it can definitely be done. But having said that, the reasons why are not clear to me. I think it's just a question of, you know, talent meeting opportunity, and maybe, at the moment, that generational talent. And obviously, the other thing is that in this kind of situation where clearly there is an institutional sort of inertia to be overcome, okay, the first person that comes through has to be, incredibly capable. I think that is what it will require. There has to be a generational female talent who has to come through, break the door open, and then I believe it can sort of catch on. But from what I understand, there is work going on, and hopefully we will have a female driver and female world champion really soon. I would love to see the day.
So I had asked the most intelligent entity about this question before I asked you. I had asked ChatGPT the same question. The answer that I got was something related to cycle of invisibility. So if you have no women entering the sport, there are no role models for younger women to be
Yeah,
inspired by. The first person to race in Formula One was somebody called Maria Philippis in 19
Philippines.
yes,
Yes.
in 1958. I want to ask another question, which is also, I believe, quite controversial. What is your opinion about Formula E?
I don't have much of an opinion. To paraphrase what I think Michael Schumacher said in an interview to American television, um, when he was asked, why are you not interested in taking part in the Indy 500? He basically said that how many people from IndyCar racing come and survive and do well in Formula One? And how many people from Formula One go and do well in Indy? I think there you have your answer. Um, Formula E seems to be, it's obviously, if you argue from a technological standpoint and car performance standpoint, it's a step down. So in that sense, you will never have the absolute elite single-seater drivers going to Formula E. You will always have, it's like how MotoGP and World Superbikes works, right? You cannot make it in MotoGP, you go to World Superbikes. It's kind of similar in Formula One, I suppose. You have people who are, let's be fair, not that great in Formula One, but they are doing very well in Formula E. So, in that sense, the depth of the field, I would say, would be, um, not comparable to Formula One. But having said that, I'm sure. So I've seen a couple, and in fact, there was a Formula E race in Hyderabad as well. Um, the races are fun. I mean, when I get a chance, I do watch them. In fact, the most fun racing series to watch, it's the Australian V8 Supercar series. It's by far the most entertaining racing series. So it's not always about, as a viewer, sometimes it's not always about, what the so-called quote unquote pinnacle of the sport is. The product also has to be exciting. So in Formula One's case, even if it's not always very exciting, what is undisputed is that it's the, pinnacle of engineering and pinnacle of driver talent. So it has that going for it. Formula E has, I mean, so in that sense, it's not a fair comparison, I would say. You could think of it as a, supporter series or not a feeder series because a feeder series would mean people go from Formula E to Formula One. But yeah, it's just one more thing for the racing fan to watch if you are interested.
Next few questions, I'll just be putting you on the spot. You can choose to elaborate if you want to, but now the question will have specific answers. So I want to ask you which Formula One season in your entire life that you've watched, I mean, seasons that you've watched, I don't want to talk about historical seasons that we've read about. Which Formula One season that you've watched did you find most exciting?
I'd have to say it's between 2003 and 2006. 2003 ended with a victory, 2006 didn't. But objectively speaking, both were fantastic years and both had everything. You had multiple drivers winning. You had, unforced errors being committed by both all championship protagonists. You had politics and intrigue. In 2003, you had the whole, Bridgestone protesting before Monza about the camber that the Michelin short teams were running. And then you know, basically kind of handicapping the Michelin teams for the rest of the season. 2006, you had the Renault mass damper issue. So it was everything, clash of personalities. You had Flavio Briatore and very flamboyant characters, right? But I would give the edge to 2003 because it was a three-way battle for the title, and in my view, and for me, it will always be Formula One's holy trinity of teams: Ferrari, McLaren, and Williams. That was the last time it was a Ferrari versus McLaren versus Williams, straight fight, and it got decided in the last two races. So 2003, I'd give the award to 2003.
Okay, so we got a specific answer. We want specific answers here. Next question is, can you pick your favorite Formula One race?
Favorite Formula One race? Ah, it's not an easy one.
You can say one,
I'll
two,
pick
three.
three.
Yeah, but then you
Yeah,
have to
I'll
you have
pick
to
three.
order it. I don't want any random order. Yeah.
Okay, for obvious partisan reasons, my favorite would be Suzuka 2000, because of just, you could cut the tension with a knife. So much was at stake. It was a straight fight between Schumacher and Hakkinen on track. And back in those days, believe it or not, Ferrari won races on strategy, and that's what happened. So for emotional reasons, obviously, that was one of I mean, that's my favorite race. So, but two other races which I consider to be, fantastic races. I would talk about, I think it was Hockenheim in 2000. Hockenheim in 2000. Yes, that was the year Rubens Barrichello won from 18th on the grid. Um, and that was the old Hockenheim ring, which, it was, I mean, the modern Hockenheim was basically, it was a neutered version of it for safety reasons. But the old Hockenheim ring, cars would touch 365, 370 kph. Apparently, around 75% of the lap was at full throttle. So, very exciting race. Um, honorable mention. I would also, honorable mention to. So joint second, I would say Kimi Raikkonen, 2005 Suzuka. That was a performance for the ages. I think he won that from 17th or 18th as well, overtaking Fisichella on the last corner. That was a fantastic race. And what else? Number three, I would put. Um, I think the 2006 Hungarian Grand Prix was also a lot of fun, which Jenson Button won in changeable conditions, which Schumacher made one of his major unforced errors because his ego would not let him finish behind Nick Heidfeld. He could have just settled for the points. Anyway, it was immaterial because of Suzuka and the fuel pump problem in Brazil. But yeah, off the top of my head, I can think of these four, but I'm sure there are many more, and I'm sure once we end this conversation, there will be 10 more races which pop up in my head, and I'll be like, I wish I thought of that.
What about the Spanish Grand Prix that Schumacher won in the rain?
So that was a good race, but I don't think I watched it
Okay.
completely. I
Okay.
would have read
Ah,
about it,
ah, ah,
and
ah.
even then, we are not talking about the best performance of a driver. Then that's Michael Schumacher, Hungary 98, Michael Schumacher, Spa 94, then that's a different conversation. But objectively speaking, as a neutral, as somebody, the kind of race which would make somebody a fan of the sport, I think that's what I was going for.
Okay. So again, I hope I am not incorrect here, but I'm going to disclose to the viewing audience who your favorite racing driver of all time is, and he is
If it
also
wasn't obvious by now.
and he is also my favorite racing driver of all time. We will fight anyone who chooses to disagree with us regarding his greatness. Michael Schumacher. Now the question is, who is the second greatest racing driver according to you? And you have to pick one. You can't hedge your choices.
I mean, I did talk about who I think are the top four or five,
Yes, but you have to
but
mention who is number two. Is it
mm,
Senna? Is it Fangio? Is it Clark?
it's Clark. It's Jim Clark, really. Um, just everything I've read about him, right? Especially, the book I told you about, the old book from um, Conport Club, and a couple of documentary films which I also watched about him. Um, he was just, I mean, every every peer of his used to talk about him in reverential tones. Everyone accepted that, we were, you know, he's doing something else. We are just driving. I think, at least from what I have read and seen and heard, I don't think there was a more undisputed opinion when it came to his, a driver's peers and team principals and people in the sport. Um, he had an insane, win ratio. Um, his driving style was supposedly so smooth that he would stress out the components the least. So in his Lotus days, I'm forgetting. I mean, Colin Chapman was the genius and the team principal behind Lotus's success in the 60s and 70s. But I recall an interview with one of the chief mechanics of the Lotus team back then, where they talked about an identical part. I think one of the parts attached to the crankshaft between I mean, after an entire race distance, the condition of that part in Clark's car versus his teammate's car, there was a hell and heaven difference. So, in an era where dying was very common, where mechanical failures were, I mean, it was a given. Okay. Cars failed a lot more back in the day. um, in that era, to be head and shoulders above your peers and to be so successful, not just in Formula One. This man was racing Formula Two, British stock cars. He was doing everything, and it does seem like he lived, breathed, and you know everything for him was about racing, and he was the best at it. So I'll have to say Jim Clark.
Okay, that's fair. The next question is again, I want specific answers here. Which Formula One team do you like most after the teams whose t shirt you're wearing, after Ferrari? Number two.
Uh, McLaren has to be McLaren. I think they've always, historically, I would say, the driver roster has always been very strong. And I got into the sport at a time when they were winning. Um, they were very dominant, and they between Ferrari and McLaren, we saw some fantastic battles. And I mean, for me, maybe it's not a completely logical answer, but at least in my time of watching Formula One, it has to be McLaren. There are other great teams, right? There are Lotus, which I spoke about, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, Tyrrell, etc., etc. But I mean, let's keep it, the frame of reference. Let's just keep it, 90s onwards. And if that's the marker, then that's McLaren for me.
I had made a video and it's available on my channel. I talked about Ron Dennis. Ron Dennis, I believe, is the most successful team principal in the history of Formula One. And there's a very interesting thing I learned about it while I was doing research for that video, that he had this rule that Formula One cars for McLaren had to be of a particular color. It had to be a steel grayish color because gray symbolizes seriousness. Every other color, everything else could be changed. The color could not be changed. The color of the car. Of course, it did change eventually, but
That's a bit odd because McLaren, obviously, Bruce McLaren started out with the papaya orange color, and then, you know, a lot of it was dictated by your sponsors. So the iconic Marlboro McLaren of the 80s, for me, that's the most, I mean, okay, because it's a close toss-up between the Marlboro McLaren and the silver gray McLarens of the late 90s and early 2000s. But interesting.
yeah,
I didn't know
there
about
was
his
something about that. I may be completely wrong also.
affinity towards gray.
Okay, so again, I think we are both in agreement here. I just want your reason for the audience. Why do you think Michael Schumacher is the greatest Formula One driver of all time?
It goes back to what I said about a Sunday racer. Um, in my view, the true greats of the sport are Sunday men. Um, it doesn't matter which discipline of racing it is. For me, the hallmark of a truly great driver is the range of conditions he's able to cope with, be it the weather, be it the opposition, be it the car itself. And I feel like on all these fronts, he was head and shoulders above his peers when he was at his peak. And the interesting thing about his peak is I was listening to this interview of Ross Brawn, who was you know, the technical head of Ferrari in its glory years. And in fact, he worked with Michael Schumacher from, I believe, 1993 when he was with Benetton. So he was involved in all of Michael Schumacher's title successes. So the interviewer asked Ross about exactly this question: Ki, what made him so great? What do you think was his peak? Which period was Michael Schumacher's peak? So Ross kind of sort of chuckles and says, I don't believe he really had a peak because you are talking about a guy who essentially reached a peak fairly early in his career and flatlined. But his flatline was so high, and he rarely dipped below that level of performance throughout his entire career. Um, and also the other aspects, right? So now this is just about, the speed, the ability in changing conditions, the ability to deal with pressure. Because remember, he won the world title for Ferrari after 21 years. Um, he was, um, I don't know how much the audience knows about this, but again, people have recency bias, right? I always bring this example up because there are a lot of Sebastian Vettel sympathizers who make excuses like it was such a high pressure job, nobody, it's not for Ferrari, it was so much pressure, etc., etc. He sort of buckled under the pressure, but anybody would have done. Yes, but this pressure was nothing compared to what Michael endured, especially when things started going wrong. In 96, obviously that was the first year, so that was not much of an issue. There were other challenges in 1997 because the car development direction was not ideal. There was, I won't say infighting, but people were not happy in the team. And then, of course, the infamous collision with Jacques Villeneuve happened, and the title slipped from his grasp. 98 was another failure. The questions started piling up, right? You questions from Luca di Montezemolo, who was leading the racing program at the time. Questions from the press on, was this the right decision? You hired a two-time world champion who clearly, had a meltdown, let's say, in 1997 in the final race. He could not close the deal. He did not get the job done. Um, Now that is pressure. I think uh, the kind of pressure he was able to deal with, he was able to deliver that title in a year where McLaren and Hakkinen were also incredibly good. 2001 was also, a close season, but not as close as 2000. So that's another aspect of his ability as a driver, which I feel like sort of differentiates him from the rest. Um, then, of course, wet weather ability. All the greats in all forms of motorsports show their true level when the conditions are changing. It does not matter what the form of motorsport is. At the end of the day, it's all about finding grip, right? If you are on two wheels, there are two contact patches between you and the road. If you are on four wheels, there are four. And the true greats are the ones who are able to, call it what you will, call it intuition, call it, seat of the pants awareness. They have it. And he had it. I think uh, people talk about, his dominance in the early 2000s. I would make the case that even if he never won a title after 2000, he would still be regarded as one of the, or if not the greatest modern driver of the era. Because if you look at his performances in the late 90s, he was doing things with that car which nobody else could have or should have done. The Perez 1997 example you brought up is a classic example. That car was not even the fourth or fifth fastest on the grid, and in absolutely appalling conditions, he proved why he was a cut above the rest. So these are some of the racing and mental aspects. There is another aspect which people sometimes lose sight of, and don't really factor in when it comes to assessing greatness, so to speak. He was a great leader of men. Um, you had a guy who demonstrated levels of commitment which were never seen in Formula One drivers earlier, right? He was one of the first to arrive and one of the last to leave on race weekends. Um, by all accounts, again, you can people who think I'm just you know batting for him because he's my favorite, you can go look this up, and you can hear from all the people who worked with him. Um, just the the kind of camaraderie he had with his mechanics, with his team members, with the cooks in the motorhome, right? The kind of energy you need to truly, galvanize your close group to do great things for you. I think, again, I obviously have a bias against Alonso, but this is precisely one of the reasons why I feel, I mean, great driver, legendary driver. I mean, two-time world champion, beat Schumacher fair and square. But he was, when he wins, it's his credit. When he doesn't, it's the fault of the team. And I challenge anyone to find me a single soundbite from Michael blaming his team. I think that was another thing which kind of ensured that even though you had all this noise going around, when the sort of dream team was not delivering the world title that Ferrari so desperately needed, they were still able to have this really strong core of people who eventually delivered that kind of dominance. So I think that's another reason why I feel like it doesn't, 91 wins, seven titles. I don't think it would have mattered that much. Um, Lewis Hamilton fans might say that I'm saying this because, now he no longer has the most race wins, and most of his records are now either with Hamilton or Verstappen. But it's true. It's true in a sport where it's not as easy to sort of define true greatness because of the disproportionate impact of the vehicle and the engineering on the outcome. But if you factor in all of these things, in my mind, there is no doubt that he was head and shoulders above his peers. And in fact, the kind of standards he set from a commitment, fitness, professionalism perspective, that's how modern Formula One is, and I think a lot of it is in his image, and to an extent Senna as well. Because I'll not I'll be remiss to not take his name here as well, because these were the sort of two superhuman kind of drivers that emerged in the late 80s and early 90s, who really showed that the sky is truly the limit when it comes to what you can achieve in Formula One. Um, I will. The final thing I will say is, yes, there is a counter argument to be made sometimes when it comes to his behavior on track. Uh, Similar to what Max Verstappen very rightly faces in today's day and age. Now, it's interesting. Okay. By all accounts, he was an extremely nice guy off track. He used to he used to party with. There is a famous. There's a video of he used to love karaoke, and there's great footage of him partying with Williams people, with people from McLaren, etc., etc. So off the track, there was no doubt about who he was as a man. But on track, there was so many of these red mist sort of instances, right? Where um, his ego, I believe it's his ego. I think you kind of, we would never know because we have not been the best of the best, undisputed best in our professions. But I think he had this, switch in his mind which flipped over whenever he was backed into the corner. um, Infamously, the collision with Hill, although I would argue, there were unfair bans over the 1994 season, where there were race wins he was stripped off, and, the instances where the team was disqualified, similar in 1997. So I think there were contributing factors for those incidents. Doesn't excuse it, of course, but this is to me again, something that I believe he got from Senna. He really admired Senna, and Senna was also of this, uncompromising variety of drivers who really thought they were better than the others. And they're humans after all, right? What good would be a hero if we didn't have demons to fight? I mean, no one's perfect. So yeah, that's a very long answer, but since I've had so many years to think and ponder over this, I thought I'll give you the long answer.
Yeah, yeah, perfectly fine. That's what podcasts are for. Um, Last two questions before we do this test, which is more of a test for me than for you, but last three, two of them are questions. The last one would be a test. So, which one is your favorite Formula One circuit?
Ah, has to be Spa.
Spa in Belgium. Okay.
Yes.
Um, Penultimate question. What is your, I know you said that you only have academic interest in Formula One now. Based on your academic interest, what is your prediction for which driver is going to win the season that's currently underway?
Oscar Piastri, unless Max Verstappen does something truly special and Red Bull manage to close the developmental gap with McLaren. Um, I it's a win-win for me both ways. As a you know dispassionate observer, because if McLaren wins, as I said, I absolutely don't mind McLaren winning the world title. Okay, and Oscar Piastri seems like a. I mean, I have to say I've been impressed by the general performance, obviously, but also the way he's handling things. It does seem like he's not the kind of guy who is going to give away the title, So I think that's a good place to be in. And well, Max is Max, I think he's still, I mean, it's like Schumacher in the late 90s, he has the ability to make that difference. And he'll be there whenever McLaren drop the ball, he'll be there. So so yeah, I still think it's going to be Piastri because I feel like McLaren is not going to slip up.
So we are at the end of the podcast. The final thing that we are going to do is something which the Formula One official channel had done on YouTube. We are also going to replicate it. We're going to go all the way back to 1950, starting from 2024, and we will list the drivers world champion. Just to make it a little bit interesting, we are also going to try to name the nationality of the driver who has won the world championship. So I'll go 1 year and then you go, and then hopefully we'll reach 1950. Okay.
Okay.
So 2024, Max Verstappen, Netherlands.
Okay. 2023, Max Verstappen, Netherlands.
2022, Max Verstappen, Netherlands.
2021, of course. 2021, Max Verstappen, Netherlands.
2020, Lewis Hamilton, Great Britain.
चलो यार 2017 तक चले जाओ अभी.
Okay, so
2017 तक it's Lewis Hamilton.
chalo, 2016, Nico Rosberg, and he's what?
15 and 14 it was Lewis, right? 15 and 14 it's Lewis.
Okay. Okay.
Britain.
13, Sebastian Vettel, Germany.
तो 13 to 2010 Sebastian Vettel,
बस हो गया.
Germany. I will
2009,
then 10
Jensen
हो गया
Button.
ना? So
2009, Jensen
Button.
Button. That is
Let's also name the team.
Okay.
The team and nationality.
2009, Jensen Button, Braun GP. Yeah. 2008.
2008, Lewis Hamilton, McLaren.
2007, Kimi Raikkonen, Ferrari, Finland.
2006, 2005, Fernando Alonso, Renault, Spain.
You are doing too many years. Don't do that. It's my test
No,
also.
that's the only way we'll get through this quickly.
Okay.
Acha, okay. All right.
2004 to 2000, Michael Schumacher, Ferrari, Germany. 1999.
Mika Häkkinen, McLaren, Finland. 1998, Mika Häkkinen, McLaren, Finland.
1997, Jacques Villeneuve, Canada, Williams.
1996, Damon Hill, Williams, Great Britain.
1995, Michael Schumacher, Germany, Benetton.
1994, Michael Schumacher, Benetton, Germany.
1993, Alain Prost, Williams, France.
91 was Senna.
92. I want you to say 92.
Oh, sorry, 92. 92 was Mansell. Mansell for Williams. No, Mansell for Williams. Mansell is British.
91, Brazilian Ayrton Senna for McLaren.
I think same for 1990.
Yes.
The year of my birth. Senna won, McLaren, Brazil.
89, Alain Prost, McLaren, France.
89, 88, 88. Oh, Senna. 88 was Senna's first title. Brazil. For McLaren.
87, Nelson Piquet, Williams, Brazil.
86. 86 was Alain Prost. Alain Prost for McLaren.
France.
Alain
85,
Prost is French.
85 also, Alain Prost, France, McLaren.
84 was Niki Lauda. It was his comeback title.
Yes.
Niki Lauda.
For
McLaren. Niki
McLaren,
Lauda is Austrian.
Austria. 83, Nelson Piquet, Brazil. I believe I'm not able to remember the car.
Nelson Piquet.
Probably Williams, not sure. That was not what I'm not sure
Nelson
about the
Piquet,
car.
Nelson. Brabham. Bernie
Okay.
Ecclestone's team.
Okay. 82,
82. 82 was famous Monaco-based YouTuber's dad who won the title despite winning only one race. So KK Rosberg for Williams. And KK Rosberg
he won
was
one
Finn.
race.
Yes, he won a race and he won the title.
All right. 81, again, Nelson Piquet, not Nelson Piquet Jr., Nelson Piquet, Brazilian. That was 1981. 1980,
80. There was 79. Was it 80?
I always have struggled with
Was it Alan Jones?
Yes, Alan Jones from Australia.
Alan Jones. Williams.
Yes.
Williams, he was
1979,
driving
of
for
course,
Williams.
is the Ferrari victory by Jody Scheckter from South Africa.
Jody Scheckter.
1978,
78. Oh, 78. The great Mario Andretti.
Mario
Andretti for Lotus.
and people think he's from Italy, but he's actually American.
He's not.
So
He's Italian American.
yes. 1977 is Niki Lauda for McLaren, Austrian.
Or no.
No, that was Ferrari. That was
Ferrari.
That is Ferrari. Niki Lauda was Ferrari, 1977. 1976.
Anyone who has seen Rush,
Yes.
1976 was James Hunt
James
from
Hunt.
McLaren.
75 again.
James Hunt is, of course, British.
Yes. 75 again, Niki Lauda, Ferrari, Austrian. 74.
74. 74. 74 was Emerson Fittipaldi. He was the youngest world champion till Fernando Alonso broke his record.
Emerson Fittipaldi, 74. 73.
Emerson Fittipaldi, Brazilian, he won for McLaren. McLaren, I think. Lotus or McLaren?
I think it was
McLaren.
I think it was McLaren. Anyways, 73.
But he.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was saying he won two titles.
Yes.
One was with
Yes.
McLaren,
he
one
won
was
two.
with Lotus. I don't remember which was which.
I don't remember the cars. By this time, I only remember the names. 73, Sir Jackie Stewart. 72.
Jackie Stewart. Jackie Stewart would have been for Tyrrell. He was driving for Tyrrell. Ken Tyrrell and his team.
72.
72 was Fittipaldi again.
71 again, Sir Jackie Stewart. 1970.
70, 70.
70 is a famous
1970.
Formula One season. Very unique victory. Only time this has happened. It's not very pleasant.
Oh, Jochen Rindt.
Yes.
Jochen Rindt. Jochen Rindt, the only posthumous world champion.
Yes.
Jochen Rindt was Austrian.
Yes.
He drove for Lotus. He was driving for Lotus.
He
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
sadly died during, I think, a practice session, and he had built up a points lead that nobody could overcome. So
Unassailable points lead.
unnecessary point lead. Yes. 1969 again, Sir Jackie Stewart. That's the three victories of Sir Jackie Stewart: 69, 71, and 73. 1968.
68. 68 was Brabham. I think, okay, let's go with Graham Hill.
Graham Hill,
Was it
68.
Graham Hill?
Yes, 68. Graham
So
Hill.
before Nico Rosberg won his title, so Graham and his son Damon were the only father and son duo to win the title.
Yes. 67 was Dennis Hume from New Zealand. Graham Hill was also from
Denny Hume.
Denny
Yeah.
Hume, and Graham Hill also from Britain. 67, Denny Hume from New Zealand. 66.
66 has to be Brabham then. If it
Yes.
wasn't 68, then it
Yes.
has to be Jack Brabham. And again, Jack Brabham driving a
in his
car
own
with his
car.
own name.
Brabham Racing. And Jack Brabham, of course, is from Australia. 65, Jim Clark, arguably the greatest driver of all time. Yes.
Lotus.
64.
Yeah. 64
again is a very unique victory.
Oh, 64. I saw, so I saw this big sort of flex, this display commemorating his world title with Ferrari, Maranello. So Jackie Stewart, Jackie Stewart, what am I saying? John Surtees, only man to win, the Premier Class title in MotoGP. Back in the day, it was GP racing and Formula One.
Yes, he won
A
the
record
world.
which it's one of those records which cannot be beaten anymore.
I like to draw a parallel. John Surtees is like the Fred Perry. Fred Perry won world championship with lawn tennis and table tennis, and John Surtees won with two-wheelers and four-wheelers. It's amazing. 63.
Because specialization in sports is a thing which probably it's so hyper professional. It's unrealistic for somebody to, win the main title in two really different sport classes.
63 is again Jim
What's
Clark.
the next year?
63, Jim Clark. 62 for you.
63 is Clark. Before Clark, it was Hill. He won the title, and there was that famous interview. It's on YouTube. It's you should go check. I mean, the viewers should go check it out. Very nice interview between Graham Hill and Jim Clark.
61 is Phil Hill from America, no relation to Graham Hill.
From America, no relation.
And 1960? 1960 is somebody who has won later on also.
60, then it would be Brabham. He won 3 titles, right?
Yes.
So
So
probably 60 and
59
one
was
more.
59 was also
59.
Jack Brabham. 58, we've reached the 50s. So this is unedited. We have reached 50s from 2025. 58.
58. I'm just thinking who remains.
58, of course, we have only 4 drivers in the 50s. I think 4. Yeah, 4 drivers. This is
58.
a guy who only won once.
58. Oh, was it Mike Hawthorne?
Yes, Mike
For
Hawthorne
Ferrari.
from
For
Britain.
Ferrari from Britain.
Yes.
Underrated driver.
Yes.
Very underrated driver.
57 to 4 years from 57, 57, 56, 55, 54, Juan Manuel Fangio. And can we get to the last 2 drivers? 53.
53. Now you have only two names
Yes,
apart
but
from
then I want
Fangio.
the years. There's one more Fangio victory, and there are two
Okay, I'll
others.
go backwards. That was by 50,
So Fangio had 5 victories. 4
51.
were in succession: 57 to 54, 57, 56, 54.
The other one was probably 51. 51.
Yeah.
51.
So you have to tell me the 53.
Then 52. Oh, Ascari. Ascari won two titles.
Yes.
So it has to be 52 and 53.
Yes. Alberto
Alberto
Ascari,
Ascari
53,
from
52. 51 is
Italy,
Juan Manuel
driving
Fangio.
for
And
Ferrari.
yes, Alberto Ascari, Italian, Ferrari, 53, 52. 51 is Argentinian Juan Manuel Fangio. And I'll leave you to tell me the last one, the first
50
ever
is Giuseppe Farina, the first Formula One world champion, Italian, driving an Alfa Romeo.
Alfa Romeo. Also, probably one of the few times that Alfa Romeo has won the championship. I don't know if they won it again.
Fangio drove for Alfa. So
Yes.
Fangio has won titles with Mercedes, with Ferrari, with Alfa, and one more
And
manufacturer.
I think
It would
Fangio,
be Maserati hoga. Maserati
Maserati,
hoga.
yes.
It's
Yes. And Fangio had this
so
unique achievement of winning a driver's title where he drove for two different teams in one season.
that would be
Merce-
55,
I think
54.
it was Mercedes and
One
some
of
other
those years.
Mercedes and some other team. Where Mercedes, I think, dropped out. I think that after the incident, I don't know.
After the
Yeah, the
crash. Yeah,
crash.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So that was a unique
Not
Fangio
bad,
achievement.
huh?
So we got to
Not bad.
1950 from 2025. Of course, we were not able to mention all the teams, but that's not what many people are capable of doing. And this was completely unedited. So with that,
I had marked all this up long, long back. Glad to see I still remember some of it. I don't
see,
remember all the teams, but yeah, not bad. We should pat ourselves on the back.
okay. So I hope you liked this. Thank you, Ronak, for joining us. And again, on behalf of all the Formula One fans all over the world, I urge you to talk about Formula One more often. If you get time out of your busy schedule, maybe you should think about having a YouTube channel to talk about Formula One. I'm pretty sure you'll make more sense than many other people who have a great following in talking about Formula One.
We'll see about that.
Okay, thank you so much. See you soon.
Chalo, thank you for having me. Great conversation as always. And yeah, look forward to the next one.